This is FastInt, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
I got so frustrated, I couldn't wait till I got Mac 65 mature enough where it could start assembling itself. So that's why it has a lot of compatibility syntactically with the Atari Assembler editor. A lot of us were not formally educated in software development because it just didn't exist in the colleges at the time. Algorithms, searching, and things like that, all that stuff happened after that.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Stephen Lawrow created the Mac 65 assembler, which was published by Optimized Systems Software. Stephen became an employee of OSS, where he also worked on the company's enhanced basic products BasicXL and BasicXE. This interview took place on November 1st, 2015. In it, we discuss Bill Wilkinson of OSS, whom I previously interviewed. Let's go back before the beginning. Tell me how you got into computers before you even, saw an Atari 800. Tell me the prehistory of Stephen Lawrow.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that. Let me think about that. How did I get started? When I got out of high school, I started working in a machine shop. So I actually was a machinist for a little while. And then I guess it was in the latter part of the 70s. I've always read a lot of books and, was always interested in math and things like that. And they got a numerically controlled machine at the machine shop. But I don't know if that's what actually got me interested. I think it was I wanted to write games. And I can't remember if I had a VCS first or the Atari first. Honestly, I can't remember. But I wanted to write games. So I saved up all my money, because I didn't really make a lot of money back then, and bought the Atari 800. I think it had 4K when I got it or something like that, or 8K or whatever the entry-level model was.
If the 800
and I
probably
upgraded
had 8K,
that,
yeah.
I think it was 8K, yeah. And then I upgraded that to 16K, I think, and I think just started playing with it. So of course it was Atari Basic, and I think I got started there, just writing simple programs, stuff like that. And we had it was incredibly frustrating to use the cassette drive. I can't remember if it came with the cassette drive or I had to buy that as an extra, but yeah, it was always very dicey to save something to the cassette drive because you never knew if you were ever going to read it again. So I must have had 30 or 40 cassettes, and I would always save a file 2 or 3 times. And on the chance that most of the time they weren't able to read back, even though you bought the best tape and everything. It just was never going to happen with that thing. So I saved up. I think it was $600 back then for the 810 drive. So I bought one of those, and it, with the DOS and stuff like that, and it just, not sure what I did beyond just playing games on it initially, Star Raiders and stuff like that. But at some point I got the assembler editor, and I started getting into machine language, I think. I think because most of the books that were available at the time prior to Atari Basic, there was basically 2 things you could do with the computer as far as programming. You could either do Atari Basic or you could do assembler. So if you wanted any kind of performance or wanted to talk to the hardware at all, you had to use the assembler. Now, the interesting thing about Atari was they were actually releasing the source code for their OS. I don't know if you remember that. And they used to sell it in a blue book, a big binder. I was just looking around my office to see if I still had it. I know I used to keep it out all the time. But I probably got one of the few ones that, really the super early ones were very difficult to read because the type was so tiny, and it was not well copied, and it was light, and so you had to go over it with a magnifying glass to really get anything out of it. But it was a start, So I think that's how I got into the interest of doing that. And then, like I said, I wanted to write a game, but then I realized that there weren't really any tools to do that with. So eventually that got me down the road of writing a tool, which ultimately turned into Mac 65.
Now, I mean, you're kind of glossing over this, but I assume that you figured out pretty fast that Atari's assembler editor was pretty terrible.
Actually, it wasn't. It was just horrifically slow. But I wouldn't say it actually worked. I mean, you could do things with it, but it was horribly, horribly slow.
For compiling, and you mean?
Yeah, it just took a long time. I mean, it could take. God, I don't even remember some of the times, but it was just very, very slow. So, but it didn't have errors in it. It didn't generate bad code or anything like that. So, it actually, it did its job,
Right. Okay. It was just slow. That seems like quite a leap, though, to go from, I need a tool to a better, faster assembler to I'm going to write myself an assembler as my first program when I haven't even written a game yet. That seems like, I don't know, just like a leap of faith, or you're glossing over a lot of skill building.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure how I got down the path, because you're right, there's a lot of things, a lot of details in there that I don't remember the sequence. After all these years, I don't remember the full sequence of things that I did.
Sure.
But, God, I don't remember. And I used to call out to my phone bill went through the roof, I'll tell you. I used to call out to California. I made friends with a guy at Atari, and he was, I'm not sure what he was. He wasn't a software engineer, but he was more in the hardware area. So we would talk about the source code and stuff like that, and he would give me tips and things like that. So developed a pretty decent relationship with him. Can't remember his name after all these years, but he really gave me some insight into a lot of things that I should be looking for and things like that. And I picked up a couple of assembly language programming books and started to read through those. Started applying those to the Atari itself, and what can I do? Yeah, I think I got to the point where I realized that there was one other assembler editor out there. It was disk-based. I can't remember the name of the company, but they were in Southern California or something like that, and that one was inadequate too. That you could only do so much because everything had to be in memory. It couldn't actually read things off the disk. So I think that's kind of how I got the idea. I'm not really even sure. God, I mean,
it's been a long time.
I think it started. A lot. Yeah. One of the things that I was reminded by a friend of mine, who he and I were tinkering at about the same time in our lives on the Atari, that I wrote this one-line disassembler because I was interested in how things work. So I wrote a way to disassemble the ROMs and things like that. And I actually displayed, I can't remember, was it the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen? I figured out how to do the display list programming pretty early on by actually reverse engineering a lot of this stuff, because there wasn't really a lot of documentation on how that stuff worked. So I actually had this line at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. I can't remember. It was just one line, had the AX and Y registers, had the program counter, and maybe a couple other things. And it would modify the display list on the fly, so whatever happened, it would always be there. So if the graphics mode changed, it would still be there, So if you were running a basic program, it could, even with graphics changes and stuff like that, you could still see it. As long as your monitor had the ability to display 25 lines, which most monitors didn't back then, TV sets, but I guess I was kind of lucky that I had one. So I was able to do that, and I think from there, just the tinkering led me to, well, how can I, make an assembler that would be really fast? Again, I don't remember all the details, but somehow we got down that path, and that's how I kind of got into it, I think. And really, I do remember clearly my motivation was to try and write a game, but there wasn't any good tools out there to do that with, so I wrote the tool, but never really wrote a game.
But you enabled other people to write many other games.
Yeah, I heard that Mac 65 was used by other people. I don't know if Atari ever used it. I'm not even sure what they used for internally. I never learned that. But I did hear that there were other companies that were using it, so that was kind of nice.
So how did you get involved with the OSS people?
Okay, well, I was always inquisitive and, wanted to get more software for the computer and to do more. And I was always, following BASIC. And because I still probably did a lot of stuff in BASIC. So I think it was in one of the magazines or something like that. I saw an ad for OSS. I sort of remember it was like a January of some year. I don't know why I remember the month, but I think he had just formed a company a few months before, so I probably got one of the first copies of the OSS DOS and the, I think he called it Basic 8 Plus back then, when he put it on disk. And so I ordered that from him. Of course, when you called there for support, they didn't really have support, so you either got Bill or somebody else. And I think I wound up talking to Bill. So we just got talking, and I was just curious about how it all worked, and I actually patched this BASIC. I can't remember what I added to it, but I told him about the patch, and he couldn't believe that I figured it out from disassembling the BASIC. So he checked it against the source code, and he found that the patch I gave him actually worked. So I think he was impressed. And I can't even remember what the heck I added or fixed or something like that. It was kind of a minor thing, but I think he was impressed that I found a couple of places to fix it. So we just developed a phone report for the longest time. And after a while, he invited me out there. I think it was for one of the West Coast computer shows. How would you like to come out and, see the show type thing? So they flew me out there, and I met him. And, it was a wonderful time. And I think it was a couple months after that, they actually made an offer to me to have me come out there and work for them. And so that's how I kind of got involved with OSS.
So you were an employee. You moved out to...
Yep, California, San Jose.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Well, actually, Cupertino. They got an apartment for me out there in Cupertino.
Where'd you move out from? I guess I didn't know where you were when you.
Oh yeah. Well, I grew up on the East Coast, so basically I moved out from New Jersey. So it was quite a culture shock. Yeah, I don't know. Now you're obviously on the West Coast. Have you ever been any other place?
I've been to New York and Boston and New Jersey and visited out there. Sure.
Okay,
but
so,
I've never lived out there. But I've been there enough to realize that people are very different.
Yeah, well, let's just be honest. We're pretty rude, okay? So now we got that on the table. Now we got that off the table. When I first went out there, not realizing how strong my personality was, I probably scared the heck out of a lot of people just by saying hello. So eventually, I calmed down and stuff like that. And nothing bad came of it, you know what I mean? It was just that when you're from the East, you're not used to people being so laid back. So it was quite a shock to me, but eventually I got acclimated and things like that. So it was pretty fun.
So you're at OSS. How many employees were there at that point? I mean, I'm trying to get an idea of the size and.
I anticipated that one too. So I think when I first started there, now the other couple, I can't remember who they were, but the ones that actually developed the original Atari editor assembler, they weren't there, or he had just the relationship between them had just I wouldn't say it was, ended up badly, but, they had gone their separate ways at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I never actually got to meet them. I think I met him once at his house or something like that, and it was kind of like a social thing, and it was very brief, but they were basically out of the picture by the time that I got involved with OSS. So when I started there, I think it was Bill and his wife, Beverly, Mike Peters, and there was I may not have his name right, Mark Rose, who was, Bill was working with Bill on their DOS, the Atari DOS. And there was a couple of other people to help with packaging, shipping, and stuff like that. And, of course, myself. I think that was it in the beginning. Honestly, I can't remember if there was anybody else there at that time.
Before we were talking before about Paul Lofton and Kathleen O'Brien.
Yeah, that's right. Paul and Kathleen, yeah.
Right. All right, so you're there, you're getting acclimated, it's a small company, and what did they set you to work doing?
Well, Mac 65 was actually pretty mature at that point. I think my initial thing was to get it cartridge bound. I'm not sure when the decision was made to go to cartridges. I don't remember if Mac 65 actually sold on floppy for a little while first. It may have. I just don't remember. But there was a migration to get all of our stuff on the cartridges. So initially that wasn't too bad because we weren't the idea of doing bank selection hadn't reared its head at that time. So Bill hadn't come up with that idea yet. So I think I was helping them get everything into cartridges. God, I don't remember. I know Mac 65 fit in the 8K. I'm not sure about the BASIC. I don't know if we had to drop stuff from that initially. God, I just don't remember some of those details. But anyway, so definitely we became a cartridge-based company. And then after that, he had me work on parts of BASIC because they wanted to come up with a new version of BASIC. And he did a lot of stuff on that. I was trying to remember the stuff that he did, and he did quite a bit. He did, Bill being he had an idea of improving the floating point. So he rewrote major parts of that. Of course, from the disk-based BASIC, he had player missile graphics, I think. Oh, that's why I bought now I remember. That's why I bought the original OSS BASIC from him, because he actually had BASIC support for some of the graphic primitives, like the player missile graphics and things like that. So I remember that now. Anyway, so he did that. I think he did, I know he did a lot of the stuff with print using, if I remember that correctly, and a bunch of other stuff. Later on, when we got into the bank switching cartridges, I was basically responsible for making all that work. Now, he did the original implementation, in hardware of the bank switching, which is really a clever idea that he came up with, and how he leveraged a spare line in the Atari hardware to do that, go into the cartridge slot. But I was responsible for actually getting the code to fit in there and all work with the switching and stuff like that. So, and that was a lot of fun, if I remember correctly. It was kind of a challenge to get everything to fit, because I think we only had a 4K anchor that was in place at any one time, that was always present, if you know what I mean. So we had to figure out, all the common routines would go in this 4K bank, but anything else that it needed to switch would have to go through the bank to go to the other bank, that type of thing. So it was kind of tricky. I think there was only a couple of things that actually had to do crazy switching like that. But for the most part, we were able to keep the important things pretty accessible to each other, if you know what I mean. The visibility. And so basically I became the basic maintainer, if you know what I mean, the basic language maintainer.
So you worked through BasicXL and BasicXE?
Yeah. Yeah, some of the things that I think I added were kind of under the covers, but I remember the basic extensions that I think we did with BasicXE. Are you familiar with those at all?
Somewhat. I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I've played.
Yeah, so we came up with an idea of being able to stick a floppy in and have it load extensions to the language, basically extend the language off of that. Had we known how clever that idea was, that's something we probably should have patented. But at the time, we were thinking, it's not a big deal. Everybody else can figure this out, If you remember, Atari came out with 128K and I think the 130s.
Right, the
a little later on.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to utilize that, and if you know how basic memory management is, every line is treated as kind of a block in memory. So it can't split across things. It has to be, one hunk of memory for every line that you have in your program. So these, I forget Atari's exact scheme, but if it was 16K overlays, it may have been 16K overlays. But anyway, so I had to write the memory management routine to ripple these blocks through these different overlays when you were editing the file. If you had a large basic program and you say deleted a line early on in the program, it would, if it could, try and squish everything down from the overlays back into that main memory module. That was probably one of the more complicated things that I ever did as far as low-level stuff. I remember that was very hard, if I remember correctly. Oh, one of the things I'm proudest of, and this I had to hard sell on Bill, because it was just like he didn't believe that it could work, and it was just so entertaining that I actually got it to work. I'm sure you're familiar with the fast command, right?
No, remind me.
Okay, so basically you type the word fast in, and it goes through and changes all the floating point numbers to line numbers in the program to actually integers.
Okay.
So when it has go-tos and things like that, it doesn't have to do the floating point conversion, and it doesn't actually scan through the source anymore to find the matching line number so it knows where to go to. It actually was actually an address, I think, is what I figured out that I could stick in there. So when I told him about the idea, there was a lot of pushback from him because he didn't think it would work, and he had some ideas, I think, about the sanctity of the source code, so that I was actually going in there and mucking with the line number, so to speak, and he thought that was inherently bad. Because, you could corrupt somebody's program, and, somebody could type in all this stuff, and if there's a bug, you'll ruin the program. They'll never be able to recover it, all of which was true, but it worked. And the way Atari did their system reset, even with the way that they did it, where you could interrupt the program at any kind of a random point, I was still able to recover and figure out what was not converted and what was converted. So you could hit system reset all you want, and you would never hurt your program. So I was very proud of that. And it was a hard sell to get him to buy into it. And once he realized that there was a significant speed benefit, he appreciated it. But that was probably the first time, and I kind of did that independently. I actually wrote it up, because he objected originally, and I kind of wrote it up in a couple of days, because I kind of had it in my mind how it should look. And so when I showed him, he was a little shocked because he didn't think that it could be done so quickly. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun, and it was good camaraderie there. No hard feelings of it or anything like that. I mean, he had very good reasons for being concerned, and as it turned out, it worked out, and it really gave quite a boost in performance to basic programs.
Nice. That's awesome. And you mentioned you also had done or had fooled around with a version of BasicXL or BasicXE that was an integer basic that I guess pulled out the floating point stuff to make all the math faster, but it wasn't released. Is that right?
Yeah, it was kind of an experiment on my part. I showed it to him, and it actually had a lot of holes in it. Like, for example, you have to remember the time, the whole idea of signed and unsigned integers and things like that. So my math was just really nuts because I treated everything as an unsigned integer, and when you did subtractions, it did weird things. But if you were thinking in assembly language terms, it all made sense. But if you were thinking from a higher level language point of view, it was pretty ridiculous. And it didn't really buy that much. It didn't buy as much in performance as I had hoped it would. So we decided that it wasn't a viable project. And plus the fact that we didn't really have the ROM space, so to speak, to handle both floating point and integer types and mix them up and things like that. So it opened, kind of a whole can of worms of things that we hadn't really thought through, or at least I hadn't thought through. But it was more like an experiment to say, hey, I wonder what if I made everything that was floating point look like an integer, so that type of. So that was really kind of an unofficial type of project.
Were there other unofficial projects and experiments or unreleased software that you can remember?
Believe it or not, no. Most everything that we did release as far as BASIC and Mac 65. We did eventually update Mac 65 to support the 65 CO2. But beyond that, I can't think of anything that we did that in those two pieces that was experimental or unreleased that we didn't actually release. So, as a matter of fact, I think the last version of BASIC was BasicXL, and I think that was the last thing that we did. That was, unfortunately, Atari became pretty horrible towards the end there, and they really ignored a lot of the things that their third-party software developers did for them. So, like, for example, I think they removed some of the hardware features that we actually relied on and made it very difficult to do our cartridges with. So just things broke. And I don't know if you remember the horror of the 130XE cartridge slot, but
No.
our cartridges, there was a problem with if you didn't have the support under the cartridge would kind of flop down and it would lose connection. I think it was the 130. I can't remember because I don't have one in front of me. But one of them where the cartridge went into the back of the unit. Yeah. Was it the 130?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was the guy. And we had a heck of a time with that. And just, Atari just wasn't really being very good. So it's a shame, because I think they gave up a lot of opportunities, too, that they could have had,
Did you guys have a working, before it went bad, did you guys have a good working relationship with Ataris before the Tri-Mills took over? I mean, was there any communication, or did they just quietly...
Actually, I think it kind of went bad even before Tri-Mills took over, and I think it was just basically an indifference. I didn't have any direct contact with Atari as a representative of OSS at the time, but I know Bill had people that he spoke with, and they really considered. I think the mindset back then was that third party's nice, but we want to do it ourselves, and we can do it better ourselves. That type of thing,
Yeah.
So I remember the perfect example was Atari had this product that was kind of a word editor or like a text editor, but I can't remember what they called it.
Okay, there was one called like Program Text Editor for programmers, and they had a few little utilities like that.
It was more like a Word type thing, like I don't want to say Microsoft Word type thing, but
Atari
something
Writer.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's it, Atari Writer. And if you remember, they hired us towards the end to. They were interested in taking our DOS and extending it for their new machines that were up and coming. And one of the problems with Atari Writer, we were trying to do a better file system. Instead of this flat file system, we were trying to come up with directories and things like that. And it literally became impossible because Atari Writer, which was a big product for them, or they felt it was a very big product, they designed it so that it would do checking on the input for when somebody entered a file name. and they excluded so many characters that it was, I don't know if we ever solved it. Like, we couldn't do forward slashes, we couldn't do backslashes, for directory separators. We were completely stuck because the user could not enter a path name into the save box. And I think that caused a lot of contention because they never consulted anybody. Hey, this is what we're going to do. Do you think it's going to have any bad downstream effects? So that's the kind of thing, that's the way people or companies or whatever kind of thought back then, So we'll do it, you guys figure out how to fix it, that type of thing. Yeah, I hope I'm not being too verbose or
no,
too candid.
This is perfect. You cannot be too verbose or candid. Let's talk more about Mac 65 though. That was your baby, and I feel like we've talked the least about it. Did it sell well? Were you happy with that? Did you get a royalty? Did it make you rich?
Yeah, So I did very well through OSS. I think had a pretty fair and equitable agreement. I can't remember. I don't remember exact sales, but it did pretty well. I think Atari Basic XE, I should say, was probably their best seller. And I think Mac was second, and then Action was up there too, as maybe third or fourth. Atari, we had the writer's tool. I think Bill bought that from somebody. I'm not sure where that was. And I think we had a C language, a C interpreter. And I think that was disk-based. That one I don't have a copy of anymore.
I was going to ask you about that. OSS had something called Tiny C. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, that's it. That's the one I'm thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And that was probably when I first started seeing the C language. I know, it came out funny. But yeah, that's when I first was introduced to the C language. It was a very, and I even forget, I think that they bought that one too as well. It was very primitive. It was a very small subset of even K&R back then, I think. But it was a start, so of things to come,
All right, so you're working on Mac 65, you're working on Basics, you're humming along, and then what happened? I guess I'm asking how your time at OSS came to an end.
I think I just migrated to other interests. They weren't. OSS was kind of. I got interested in the Mac, the Macintosh at the time with Apple, and OSS wasn't really moving. Had no plans as far as I remember to move anything to the Mac, and they were more focused on the Atari ST. Because they had a kind of a brand loyalty. I think I explained to you. At least that was my impression. They were reluctant to go to other, even though they had Apple DOS. He was reluctant to port some of these things to some of this other stuff. So I think that's what happened. It was pretty amiable. I don't remember too many more details other than that. Just that I kind of moved on.
Yeah.
So
you left before the company ended and went on to program on the Mac?
Yeah. And I did some of that, and actually did some stuff on the Atari ST, and then it's just been a big blur of jobs after that. I got more into C, more into databases, and so forth and so on, so.
Did you work with Jim Dunyan?
I met him, I think, twice. And I don't know, what do you actually know about Jim?
Well, I know that Jim was an Atari programmer, and he did some stuff with OSS. I know that he committed suicide, and that's all I know.
Yeah, well, out of a lot of respect for the survivors, I'll try and be as factual as I can. But as I remember correctly, Jim developed his debugger, and he was very passionate about it. And they sold it through APX for a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. It was called Dunyan's Debugging Tool, DDT.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure how it happened. He either wanted more money from them or he wanted to expand, but somehow he got a hold, or Bill got a hold of him, or somehow they met. And they came to an agreement to include DDT as part of the Mac 65 cartridge. And he worked very hard to squeeze it into 4K. That's all I'm going to say. He took out a lot of features. If you've ever seen the full-blown DDT and then the version that's in Mac 65, it's kind of like a mini DDT. But it is so well done. It worked flawlessly. And I know he spent a lot of time. And it was quite a strain on his marital relationship, if I remember correctly, to the point where it terminated the marriage. And that's, I think, what a lot of you don't see in history, because I think a lot of people tend to put on the old rose-colored glasses when they talk about some of these old programmers. Because you don't really hear about some of these, some of the dark side of the obsessiveness of what this type of thing can do to you if you don't have, help. So, and again, I only met him, I think, a couple of times, and basically I was given kind of like the source, and, it wasn't a binary blob or anything like that. It was basically the source, and, merged it in with all the source diskettes, I think, and it just built, and it lived in its own little bank, I never really, I think I may have flipped through the source a little bit just out of curiosity, but to be honest with you, I didn't spend a lot of time studying it. But like I say, it worked so well. And let's see. I'm not sure. I mean, I had only heard a couple of things, and, finally that, at some point he, committed suicide beyond that. So very, very sad.
Yeah. All right. On a happier note, I was looking at Wikipedia says that you used Mac 65 to compile itself, as well as BasicXL and BasicXE. That's just, I'm sure it makes sense to a programmer such as yourself, but to me it's just like brains go explode at the idea of a program
well, thank you.
compiling itself.
That was one of the let's see, when I first started writing Mac 65, believe it or not, I was using the Atari Editor Assembler to do it. And it was so, don't get me wrong, it was a good product and it did well, but it was very, very slow. And I keep saying that because it literally was painfully slow. When you got into a big program, it was very painful. It could take a very long time. I can't remember the exact time, but I got so frustrated, I couldn't wait till I got Mac 65 mature enough where it could start assembling itself. So that's why it has a lot of compatibility syntactically with the Atari Assembler editor. So that's kind of how that happened. But yeah, once I was able to get it to not have to depend on the cartridge anymore to build itself, it kind of took off after that, if you know what I mean.
So what made Mac 65 so much faster? I mean, what at the core of it did you do to make it so much faster in compiling than the competition?
I'm not really sure why the Atari Assembler editor was slow, but what I did was the Mac 65 pre-syntax checks everything, and I kind of got that. I think through talking with Bill Wilkinson, I think he may have given me or inspired me in that direction, because we were talking about how BASIC works and how basically pre-tokenizes things or pre-compiles things. And, of course, we didn't call it compiling back then. I think we called it pre-tokenizing or something like that, or even P-code or something like that. So I kind of got the idea to do the same type of thing with Mac 65. And that really saves a lot of time. So basically on when you actually go to assemble your source, it doesn't have to syntax check anything. It just goes through and, does the expressions and the mnemonic lookup and stuff like that. So it makes it very fast.
What haven't I asked you that I should have?
I think you hit on the most of the major things. It was a very different world back then. I think I mentioned to you, I think I went to 2 of the computer fairs out there. The first one when Bill had me go out there to meet them, and I think the next one, the following one. I think the following one is where I met a lot of the other software developers from other companies that it was just, we were all kids, So I met the guy that wrote some of these Apple games, and he basically did it all from memory, that type of thing. And there was a real discussion about, should you write source code? Should you do it in hex? That type of thing. It's just such a different world back then and how we did things. I would say a lot of us were not formally educated in software development. Because it just didn't exist in the colleges at the time. You could take computer science, but algorithms, searching, and things like that. All that stuff happened after that. So, and it's been a little bit of a frustration because I'll be talking with some modern programmers, and they'll start throwing the nomenclature around, and I won't know what the heck they're talking about until I start seeing what they're actually doing. Then I'll realize, oh yeah, we did that in the 80s. We didn't call it that though, but it was basically the same thing. So.
Right. Yeah. And we were talking the other day in our pre-interview just about how now today's programmers just don't have. They're so far removed from the hardware. Back in the Atari days, I mean, you could get right down to it, and now there's all these levels of abstraction that programmers just don't have access to the hardware like they used to.
Yeah, I haven't done anything on some of these smaller platforms because through my career I've always been stuck with, I wouldn't say stuck necessarily, but I've always either been in back office on larger boxes or, just where my skill set, Unix type boxes and things like that. So I haven't really had an opportunity to play around with these smaller things, but I understand even some of these smaller things, you still don't really talk to the hardware. You're a little closer to it, but you still don't directly talk to registers and things like that, unless you're writing drivers and things like that. But that's the biggest thing about nowadays,
If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit community that still exists, some of which are still using Mac 65, what would you tell them?
Well, just, enjoy it, but don't be obsessed. Just remember, it's there for you. You're not there for it.
All right.
So I don't know if that's, I don't want to try and be too profound, but when you see how it could help somebody's life or destroy somebody's life, you really want to find a balance in what you do. Yeah. And you know what your limits are, Yeah. So.
Absolutely. When you saw Analog Computing magazine, pretty much all the assembly listings in there were written using Mac 65. I don't know, that must have been gratifying to just be like, wow, this whole community is taken up using my program.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you and say I had no ego, because I did in the beginning. I think you lose that as you get older and realize that you're not as special as you think you are, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But it was kind of nice to know that I had done something that people were actually getting use out of. So that was kind of nice. But I probably got a little bit of a chip on my shoulder too, until you meet smarter people, and then you realize that maybe you aren't as bright as you think you are. That type of thing.
Nice.
But yeah, it was nice to see. And believe it or not, I didn't read. I followed Bill's articles pretty religiously, and I think those were in Compute, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Because even though I worked with him, I always enjoyed reading what he had to write. And I think I've said he was such a fascinating, interesting guy to speak with. So I didn't, believe it or not, I didn't read as many of the articles as you would think. So because I think I was just like so caught up in working, I didn't really have time. But yeah, I guess that's the other thing too. I mean, most people maybe work, the 8 or 9 hour days now, but back then we would work and we didn't even think about it. We would just work until we were done, if you know what I mean. If we were stuck on a problem or something like that, we, work until you get tired, go home, go to bed, and get up the next day and continue on, that type of thing. So there wasn't like and we didn't do that all the time, but we did it a lot,
Yeah. So do you still have any Atari equipment?
Actually, I do, Kevin. So I have at least a pair of Atari 800s. Can't remember what the memory is, but they're probably both 48Ks. I have at least one 810 drive. I have an Atari. For a while, they were coming out with the what's the other size floppy that there is? The little blue thing.
The 3.5.
3.5. Yeah, I have one of their drives. By the way, do you need some of that hardware?
I don't have the 3.5 drive.
Maybe I can send that out to you.
That'd be awesome.
Because it's not doing anything for me. I have a couple of Percon drives. Now these are pretty rare, and these are the things that I actually use to build Mac 65 and BASIC and all that kind of stuff. They're double density, double-sided. I can't remember. I think they're 360K a disc. And I have master and slave. And I know that if anything happens to them, I'm dead. Because there's no way you can find this hardware anywhere.
Except for the ones that I have in my basement, right? But except for those.
So you do have some Percons?
I have 2 Percom drives, which I have not ever fired up yet, but I don't know if they work. But they're a project for a future day. But so when was the last time you fired up your hardware?
Probably 5-6 years ago. Like I said, I just have the 2 units. I'm looking at them right now, and I just have them sitting here. I don't have the power supplies here. They're somewhere else. And I don't have any of the floppy drives. I'm not sure which box I stuck those in. So right now, I just have 2 computers. And the cartridges, I'm not even sure where all my cartridges are. I had a pretty decent set of cartridges. Of course, mostly games,
nice,
Star Raiders, stuff and so on. But I'm not even sure where they are nowadays. But yeah, I still have my Ataris. I think one of them is the original one that I actually used to do all my work on.
Nice.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, because it's a slightly different color, tan or gray or whatever it was. They changed the plastic a little later.
Yeah. And
they actually start to yellow over age, and one of the ones I have is kind of yellowed. But when they first came out with them, they went for higher quality materials, and I'm pretty sure that this is the color that came out of the box.
Nice. I think that's about all I have for you. Thank you very much.
Well, I enjoyed it very much. Yeah, I wanted to thank you. Actually, I owe you more of a thanks because I think what you're doing is very important, for historical reasons. And it's just, I know that it's a hobby for you, but let's face it, there is a lot of work involved, putting all this together, correlating it, indexing it, putting it on a website, and maintaining it. It's non-trivial, and I do appreciate it, and I'm sure other people will as well. So I wanted to thank you,
Well, you're welcome. If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.